The 5 words that executed Chloe Maxwell's 3-year marriage were spoken into a microphone, amplified for 300 of New York's most elite guests to hear. "I have filed for divorce." Her husband, Richard Thorne, stood beside her on the stage of the Starlight Ballroom, his hand still resting on the small of her back, as if they were a loving couple. But his voice, the voice she fell asleep to every night, was that of a stranger, cold, final, and triumphant. He thrust a sheaf of papers into her hands. The legal jargon was a blur, but the intent was as clear as the flash of a guillotine. Just a moment ago, this was their anniversary party. She was wearing his favorite dress, her heart full of love for the man she had given up her world for. Now, a photograph filled the giant screen behind them, a crude, photoshopped image of her in a hotel bed with an unknown man. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. It was a lie, a clumsy, vicious lie, but in the court of public opinion, the verdict was instantaneous. Chloe Maxwell was an adulteress. "Richard, what is this?" she whispered, the words catching in her throat. The betrayal was a physical blow, so sudden and brutal she could barely breathe. "This is fake. You know it's fake." His handsome face, the face she had adored, was a mask of contempt. "Is it? It seems my wife has been entertaining herself elsewhere." The humiliation was a fire, licking at her skin. The whispers from the crowd were like hissing embers. She looked out and saw not friends, but a sea of judgmental eyes. Then the second knife plunged into her back. Her cousin, Isabella Vance, glided onto the stage, a vision in emerald green. Isabella, her childhood confidant, her maid of honor, her sister in all but blood. She placed a comforting hand on Richard's arm, a gesture of solidarity that condemned Chloe completely. "I'm so sorry, Richard," Isabella said, her voice dripping with poison disguised as sympathy. "I never wanted to believe it. How could you do this to the man who gave you everything, Chloe?" It was a perfectly rehearsed performance. The loving husband, heartbroken. The loyal cousin, devastated. And Chloe, the villain of their story. "As the party at fault," Richard announced, his voice ringing with false righteousness, "all marital assets revert to me. That includes your quaint little studio, Legacy Loft, which you so foolishly signed over as collateral for my last business venture." That was it, the final, killing blow. He hadn't just destroyed her reputation. He had stolen the last piece of her parents she had left, the small design studio she had poured her heart into. "And since you've disgraced the Thorne family name," he continued, savoring his victory, "you are no longer welcome here." He clicked his fingers. 2 burly security guards materialized, their faces impassive as they grabbed her by the arms. "Richard, please," Chloe cried, the last of her composure shattering. "This couldn't be happening." "I love you," he laughed then, a cruel, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous ballroom. He leaned in, his whisper a venomous hiss for her ears alone. "Love? You naive little fool. I never loved you. I loved your talent. Your studio was the only thing about you worth having." He glanced at Isabella, his eyes full of a lustful fire Chloe had never seen directed at her. "She was always the one I wanted. A real woman, not a boring, sentimental artist." He sealed his betrayal with a deep, passionate kiss, crushing his lips against Isabella's right in front of Chloe, in front of the world. The camera flashes were blinding, capturing her anguish for eternity. The guards dragged her away. Her pearl necklace, a gift from her mother, snapped, the beads scattering across the marble floor like tiny, frozen tears. They shoved her through a side door and out into the unforgiving New York night. A torrential downpour had begun. The cold rain soaked her thin designer dress in seconds, plastering it to her skin. She was left on the wet pavement, shivering, with nothing but a set of divorce papers and a heart that had been ripped from her chest. She stared up at the glittering ballroom, at the silhouettes of the man she loved and the cousin she trusted, dancing in the warm light. They had taken everything. They thought they had left her for dead. A cold, terrifying calm settled over her. The tears stopped. The shaking subsided. They thought they had destroyed Chloe Maxwell, the simple, gentle designer. They had no idea who they had truly provoked. The 3-year test was over. Chloe reached into her small clutch, her fingers finding the simple burner phone she had kept hidden all this time. It had only one number in its memory. Her fingers, though numb with cold, were steady as she pressed the call button. It was answered on the first ring. A deep, respectful male voice spoke. "We've been waiting for your call, miss." Chloe tilted her head back, letting the rain wash over her face, cleansing the pain and replacing it with icy resolve. "The test is over," she said, her voice quiet but as hard as a diamond. "Come and get me." Half a world away, Damien Blackwood sat in the silent, opulent cabin of his Gulfstream G800 as it sliced through the stratosphere above the Pacific Ocean. On the polished mahogany table before him lay a single, exquisitely rendered design for a necklace, sketched on archival paper. It was his most prized possession, the only clue he had to the identity of the artist he'd been hunting for 5 years. The designer was a ghost, an enigma known to the world's most elite circles only as Aura. Aura's work was revolutionary, transcendent. Each piece was a masterpiece that seemed to capture not just light and form, but emotion itself. Damien, a man who controlled global markets and commanded armies of executives, was utterly captivated. He had offered a 9-figure sum for a single commission. The reply, through a series of encrypted channels, had been a polite but firm refusal. His satellite phone buzzed, a sound that interrupted the hushed roar of the engines. His lead assistant, a severe-looking man named Graves, answered it. Graves listened for a moment, his stoic expression breaking into one of disbelief, then profound relief. He turned to Damien, his voice hushed with reverence. "Sir, it's the call. The test is over." Damien's cool grey eyes, usually filled with the cold light of calculated power, ignited with an intensity that startled his aide. He didn't speak. He simply stood up, his towering frame radiating an almost terrifying energy. The hunt was over. Less than an hour later, a convoy of 10 black armored Rolls-Royces swept through the rain-slicked streets of Manhattan, their silent, powerful advance parting traffic like the Red Sea. They pulled up in a perfect, menacing line in front of the Starlight Ballroom. Chloe was still huddled by the service exit, shivering uncontrollably when the doors of the lead car opened. An army of men in dark suits and earpieces emerged, fanning out to create an impenetrable perimeter. They held up black umbrellas, forming a shield against the rain, and the prying eyes of the few onlookers brave enough to witness the spectacle. Then he appeared. Damien Blackwood stepped out of the car. He was a man carved from granite and ambition, his presence so commanding it seemed to suck the very air out of the street. He ignored the rain, his focus entirely on the small, drenched figure huddled by the wall. He walked toward her, his custom-made leather shoes splashing in the puddles. When he reached her, he did something no one in the world would have believed possible. He went down on one knee, holding a large black umbrella over her, shielding her from the storm. He looked at her, his gaze not of pity, but of pure, unadulterated reverence. "I've found you," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate through her very bones. "Aura." Chloe looked into his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years she felt a glimmer of the power she had kept dormant. "You're late," she whispered, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. "The world was in my way," he replied without a hint of irony. He gently took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of warmth through her. "It won't be, ever again." He helped her to her feet and draped his own tailored jacket, worth more than a luxury car, over her trembling shoulders. He then guided her to the warmth of the Rolls-Royce, the door closing with a soft, final thud that sealed off the miserable world that had cast her out. As the convoy sped away into the night, Damien made a single call. "Graves, buy the building that houses the Starlight Ballroom, and instruct our legal team to file a lawsuit against a Mr. Richard Thorne and an Isabella Vance for corporate fraud and theft of intellectual property. I want their assets frozen by sunrise, all of them." The next morning, Richard and Isabella arrived at the Legacy Loft, giddy with their victory. They were ready to start their new life, built on the ruins of Chloe's. "I can't believe how easy it was," Isabella laughed, clinging to Richard's arm. "She really was a pathetic little fool." "The most profitable fool I've ever met," Richard agreed, unlocking the door. But the studio was not as they expected. Standing in the middle of the room was Graves, flanked by two formidable men from Damien's security detail. "Can I help you?" Richard asked, his arrogance faltering slightly. "Not unless you're here to collect your personal effects," Graves said, his voice colder than a morgue. "As of 4:07 a.m. this morning, this entire building was acquired by Blackwood Holdings. Furthermore, a lien has been placed on all assets belonging to Thorne Real Estate and Vance Imports, pending a fraud investigation." He handed Richard a thick legal document. "You are being sued for damages totaling $100 million. Richard's face went white. $100 million? That's insane. On what grounds? "For the theft of intellectual property belonging to my employer's esteemed client," Graves said. He then nodded to the security team. "These people are trespassing. Please escort them out." "You can't do this," Isabella shrieked as the guards grabbed them. "Do you know who we are?" Graves allowed himself a small, cruel smile. "Yes, you are the two idiots who picked a fight with a goddess. A fatal error." They were unceremoniously thrown onto the sidewalk, just as Chloe had been the night before. Their world, so bright and promising just hours ago, was already starting to crumble. Meanwhile, Chloe awoke in a bedroom the size of her entire former apartment, swathed in sheets with a thread count so high they felt like water. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Central Park. A quiet knock came at the door. A team of discreet staff entered, pushing racks of clothing. "Mr. Blackwood was concerned you had nothing to wear," a woman explained. "So he took the liberty of acquiring the fall collections from Chanel, Dior and Valentino for you to browse." Another team set up a lavish breakfast, prepared by a chef who had been flown in from Paris overnight. Chloe was stunned into silence. This level of opulence was beyond comprehension. This was the power she had walked away from. Damien entered the room, dressed in a simple but impeccably tailored grey suit. "Good morning," he said, his eyes scanning her for any sign of distress. "I hope you slept well." Where am I?" Chloe asked, her voice hoarse. "My home," he answered simply. "And yours, for as long as you wish." He gestured to the racks of haute couture. "This is just a temporary measure. I've arranged for the flagship stores on Fifth Avenue to close for a private shopping experience for you this afternoon." Chloe stared at him, overwhelmed. "Why are you doing all this?" Damien walked over to a small, climate-controlled display case in the corner of the room. Inside, resting on a velvet cushion, was the sketch for the necklace. Her sketch. "Because 5 years ago, I saw this design," he said, his voice filled with a passion that seemed at odds with his cold exterior. "And I understood that the person who created it was not just an artist, but a visionary. I have spent a fortune trying to find you, Aura, not to commission your work, but to simply be in the presence of your genius." He turned back to her, his gaze direct and unwavering. "Last night those insects tried to crush that genius. I am merely providing the resources for you to remind them, and the world, of what happens when you try to snuff out the sun. Richard and Isabella Thorne were in freefall. Their bank accounts were frozen, their family businesses ensnared in a legal nightmare spun by Damien Blackwood's shark-like lawyers. Their meteoric rise in society had turned into a catastrophic plummet. In a single day they had become pariahs. "This is all her fault," Isabella shrieked, pacing the floor of Richard's now mortgaged apartment. "That pathetic wretch must have found some rich old man to save her." Richard's face was pale with fury and fear. 100 million. Where did a legal claim like that even come from? Who is she? Desperate, they pinned all their remaining hopes on a single event, the prestigious Innovate Design Award. Winning it would restore their credibility, attract new investors, and give them the ammunition they needed to fight back. Their entry was a design for a new public art installation, a piece they were confident would win. It was, after all, based on a concept Chloe had sketched out months ago, a concept she had foolishly shared with them. The night of the award ceremony was a glittering affair, held at the Museum of Modern Art. The entire design and architecture world was in attendance. Richard and Isabella, dressed in their last remaining designer clothes, walked in with forced confidence, pretending the rumors of their downfall were just that, rumors. They took their seats, blissfully unaware of the judgment that awaited them. The ceremony began. The host announced the finalists for the main award. And the last finalist, Richard Thorne and Isabella Vance for their project, Urban Echo. A polite ripple of applause went through the room. Richard and Isabella beamed, squeezing each other's hands. They walked to the stage to present their project. A 3D rendering of their installation filled the screen behind them, a beautiful fluid sculpture of metal and light. "Our vision," Richard began, his voice smooth and practiced, "is to create a piece that reflects the chaotic yet harmonious rhythm of the city." He was cut off by the host. "Pardon me, Mr. Thorne. We have a surprise announcement. The patron of this year's award has invoked a clause to appoint a special guest judge to deliver the final verdict. Please welcome—" The room held its breath. A side door opened, and a woman walked out. It was Chloe. She was not the broken, rain-soaked creature they had cast out. She was a queen. She wore a stunning, form-fitting gown of liquid silver that shimmered under the stage lights. Her hair was styled in elegant waves, and a necklace of breathtaking diamonds, a piece of her own design, crafted overnight by Damien's private jewelers, graced her neck. Her beauty and poise were so overwhelming, so powerful, that an audible gasp swept through the audience. Beside her, cool and imposing, was Damien Blackwood. Richard and Isabella froze, their faces masks of pure horror. "Chloe," Richard stammered. What are you doing here?" Chloe took the microphone, her calm, clear voice filling the auditorium. "I'm here to judge," she said simply. Her eyes, cold and sharp, locked onto the design on the screen. "An interesting piece. Urban Echo, you call it. It's a shame you stole it." "That's a lie," Isabella shrieked, her composure shattering. "Is it?" Chloe replied, her tone dangerously soft. She nodded to the tech booth. The 3D rendering on the screen was replaced by a series of hand-drawn sketches. They were identical to the final design, but imbued with a life and genius the 3D model lacked. At the bottom of each page was a signature, Aura. "These are the original concept sketches from the anonymous artist Aura," Chloe announced. "Submitted to this very committee 2 years ago, your design is not an innovation. It is a mediocre, soulless copy of a master's work." The judges on the panel looked at each other in shock. The evidence was undeniable. "And as for your creative process," Chloe continued, "perhaps this will shed some light." An audio file began to play over the speakers. It was a recording of Richard and Isabella talking in their apartment. Damien's team had been very thorough. Isabella's voice, smug and cruel, echoed through the hall. She was so stupid, Richie. She just left all her old sketchbooks in the studio. This urban echo idea alone will make us famous. Richard's voice replied, "She was always better at ideas than business. That's why we're here, and she's, wherever she is, in the gutter probably." The recording ended. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Richard and Isabella's ragged breathing. They were exposed, utterly and completely. The audience, which had been murmuring in confusion, now stared at them with unified, undisguised contempt. Chloe delivered the final blow, her voice ringing with the authority of a queen passing sentence. "The Innovate Design Award is for creators, not for thieves. You are disqualified, and I would advise you to find a good lawyer. Aura is notoriously protective of her work." She turned her back on them, a gesture of ultimate dismissal. Damien stepped forward and took the microphone. "Blackwood Holdings is withdrawing its patronage from this award, effective immediately," he announced. "We will be redirecting the funds to establish a new grant for young ethical designers. Integrity, it seems, is a resource that needs nurturing." Richard and Isabella stood frozen on the stage, trapped in the glare of 1,000 judgmental eyes. Their last hope had turned into their public execution. As security escorted them off the stage, past a throng of reporters now clamoring with questions, they finally understood. This wasn't just a rich old man Chloe had found. This was a power beyond their comprehension. They hadn't just made an enemy, they had awakened a dragon. The humiliation at the Design Awards was a crushing blow, but the Vance family was not ready to surrender. Isabella's mother, a woman with a will of iron and a face of plastic, decided the only way to combat the scandal was with an aggressive display of social power. She pushed forward the family's annual high-profile charity auction, a pillar of the New York social scene. It was a desperate attempt to show the world they were still relevant, still powerful. Isabella, disgraced but defiant, was placed on the hosting committee. It was her chance to regain some footing, to smile for the cameras and pretend her world wasn't burning to the ground. The auction was held in a grand ballroom shimmering with gold leaf and old money. When Chloe arrived on Damien's arm, a hush fell over the room. She was wearing a gown of royal blue, so vibrant it made every other color seem faded. She radiated a confidence that was no longer just poise, it was power. Isabella saw her from across the room, and her blood boiled with a potent cocktail of hatred and jealousy. She marched over to them, a venomous smile plastered on her face. "Chloe, darling," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'm so surprised to see you here. I didn't think you could afford a ticket." She looked Chloe up and down, then gave Damien a condescending glance. "It seems you've landed on your feet. You always were good at finding a man to take care of you." The insult was clear. Chloe was nothing more than a high-class gold digger. Damien's jaw tightened, but Chloe placed a calming hand on his arm. She turned to Isabella, her expression unreadable. "It's a lovely party, Isabella," Chloe said, her voice as smooth as silk. "I do hope you enjoy it. It sounds like it might be your family's last." Before Isabella could retort, the auction began. The first item was a set of diamond earrings. A socialite opened the bidding at $50,000. Isabella's mother, determined to make a statement, immediately bid $100,000. $200,000, Chloe said calmly, without even glancing at the stage. Isabella's mother glared and bid $250,000. $500,000, Chloe said, her voice laced with boredom. The room went silent. The earrings weren't worth half that. Mrs. Vance, red-faced, was forced to back down. The gavel fell. "Sold to Ms. Maxwell." The second item was a vintage Rolls-Royce. Richard's father, trying to support the Vances, bid $200,000. $1 million, Chloe said, turning a page in the auction catalogue as if discussing the weather. Again, silence. The Thorns were forced to retreat, sold to Miss Maxwell. It went on like this. For every item a Vance or a Thorn tried to bid on, Chloe would counter with a number so absurd, so overwhelmingly extravagant, that it crushed all opposition. She wasn't bidding, she was annihilating them. The crowd watched in a state of stunned fascination. This wasn't an auction, it was a public flogging, and money was the whip. The final item of the night was the centerpiece, the legendary Star of Autumn, a flawless 50-carat yellow diamond. It was the Vance family's last chance to save face. "This is the one," Isabella's father whispered to his wife. "We must have it." He had pooled the last of his liquid assets. This was their final stand. The bidding opened at $5 million. It climbed quickly. 10 million. 15. Mr. Vance, his voice shaking, placed his final bid. $20 million. The room was electric. Isabella looked over at Chloe with a triumphant smirk. "There," her eyes said. "Beat that." Chloe looked at the glittering diamond on the stage. Then she turned and looked at Damien. She seemed to sigh as if a thought had just occurred to her. "This is taking too long," she said quietly, just to him. "I'm getting hungry." Damien nodded. He raised a single finger, and Graves, his assistant, appeared at his side instantly. "The entire collection," Damien said simply. "All of it, and the auction house itself. Make them an offer they can't refuse. I want the deed by the time we finish dinner." Graves nodded and disappeared. A moment later, just as the auctioneer was about to bring the gavel down for the Vances, a man hurried onto the stage and whispered in his ear. The auctioneer looked utterly bewildered. He tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, pardon the interruption. I have just been informed that, well, that the entire Star of Autumn collection, including all remaining lots and the diamond, have been acquired in a private sale." A wave of confusion swept the room. "By who?" someone shouted. The auctioneer swallowed hard. "By Mr. Blackwood, on behalf of Ms. Chloe Maxwell." The silence that followed was so profound you could hear a diamond drop. The Vances and the Thorns stared, their faces the color of ash. Chloe hadn't just outbid them. She had bought the entire game. She had taken all the pieces off the board. Chloe stood up, smoothing down her gown. She gave Isabella a cool, dismissive glance. "It seems my sugar daddy has quite the appetite," she said, her voice carrying in the silent room. She then turned and walked away with Damien, leaving the Vance and Thorn families utterly, publicly, and financially obliterated in her wake. They had not just lost their money, they had lost their standing, their pride, their very place in the world they had fought so hard to occupy. The final act was set on the grandest stage of all, the World Design Summit, held in a historic, sprawling estate outside London. It was the most important event in the luxury and design calendar, a gathering of titans, billionaires and visionaries who dictated the tastes of the world. The climax of the summit was the highly anticipated announcement of the new chairman of the Empire Group, a colossal, almost mythical, global conglomerate that owned hundreds of the world's most iconic luxury brands. Its leadership was a closely guarded secret, and the succession was the talk of the financial world. Richard Thorne and Isabella Vance were there, or rather, their fathers were. Having lost almost everything, they had pooled their last remaining resources and influence for one final desperate gamble. They were trying to secure a distribution deal with a small subsidiary of the Empire Group, a deal that might save their families from complete bankruptcy. When they saw Chloe and Damien arrive via a private helicopter, looking every bit the global power couple, their desperation curdled into pure, venomous rage. "This ends tonight," Richard's father snarled to Isabella's. "We will expose that woman for the manipulative fraud she is, even if it's the last thing we do." The main event began in the estate's grand ballroom. The air hummed with power and anticipation. The host, a distinguished British lord, took the stage. "And now," he announced, his voice booming, "the moment we have all been waiting for, the announcement of the new chairman of the board for the Empire Group, who will be our keynote speaker this evening." The Thorne and Vance patriarchs saw their chance. Mr. Thorne stood up and shouted, "A point of order. Before this summit proceeds, the integrity of this industry must be addressed. There is a fraud in our midst, a woman named Chloe Maxwell, who is using her connection to Damien Blackwood to destroy honest families." All eyes turned to Chloe. A wave of murmurs and whispers filled the room. Had the glamorous mystery woman on Damien Blackwood's arm finally been exposed? Damien started to rise, his face like a thundercloud, but Chloe stopped him with a gentle touch. She remained seated, looking completely unruffled, almost amused. The host on stage looked flustered, but then a voice came through his earpiece. His eyes widened in shock. He looked from his notes to Chloe and back again. "Sir," the host said, his voice trembling slightly as he addressed Mr. Thorne, "I suggest you sit down." He cleared his throat. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. Allow me to proceed. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my profound honor to introduce you to the visionary leader who will guide the Empire Group into the next century, the sole heir and new chairman, Ms. Chloe Vanderbilt." He gestured towards the stage entrance, but no one came out. Instead, a spotlight flared to life, not on the stage, but directly on Chloe's table. In the stunned, deafening silence, Chloe slowly stood up. Vanderbilt. The name echoed in the minds of everyone present, the founding family of the Empire Group, the reclusive, almost royal dynasty of global commerce. Chloe was not just an heiress, she was the heiress. The Thornes and the Vances stared, their faces slack with a horror that went beyond fear. They looked like men who had just realized the person they'd been bullying was a god. Chloe gracefully walked to the stage, the spotlight following her every move. She took the podium, looking out at the sea of shocked faces. "My father believed that to lead, one must first understand," she began, her voice calm and powerful, broadcast around the globe. "So for 3 years, as per the terms of my inheritance, I lived without my name, without my fortune. I wanted to see if I could build a life based on my own talent, and to find a partner who loved me for who I was, not what I was." Her gaze fell upon Richard. "I failed on that second count." She clicked a small remote. The large screen lit up, not with business projections, but with bank statements, shell company registrations, and audio recordings. It was a complete, irrefutable dossier of every crime Richard and Isabella had committed, from the corporate fraud that stole her studio to their final, most sinister plot. "What you are seeing," Chloe said, her voice turning to ice, "is evidence of a conspiracy, but it didn't end with fraud. After they cast me out, they grew fearful of what I might do. This is a recording of them hiring a man to take care of me, to arrange a permanent accident." The final recording played, Richard's voice, cold and clear, offering a man $500,000 to cut the brake lines on her car. It was attempted murder. As the recording ended, the ballroom doors swung open. Teams of international police and federal agents, coordinated by Damien's global security network, moved through the room with quiet efficiency. Chloe looked down from the stage at the two families, now surrounded. Her face was not triumphant, but filled with a kind of sad, final authority. She delivered her closing statement, a line that would be quoted in business journals for years to come. "You fought so desperately to steal my little studio," she said, her voice ringing with clarity. "But you never realized I owned the entire world. The Thornes, the Vances, and all their conspirators were led away in handcuffs, their empires turning to dust." As the room erupted in a chaotic buzz of news and speculation, Damien walked onto the stage. He came to her, his eyes filled with a love and admiration that outshone all the diamonds in the room. He took her hand. "Years ago, as a young investor, I anonymously commissioned a piece from a brilliant designer known as Aura," he said into the microphone, his voice for her, but his story for the world. "Her genius inspired me. I've spent years searching for her, hoping to meet the woman behind the art." He then went down on one knee. "Now that I've found you, Chloe Vanderbilt, I know that your greatest creation is not your designs, but yourself. Will you marry me?" Tears of joy, real and true, welled in Chloe's eyes. This was no test. This was real. She had reclaimed her name, her legacy, and in the process had found a love more valuable than any empire. "Yes," she whispered. She accepted, and as they kissed, the titans of industry and the masters of design rose to their feet, giving their new queen and her king a thundering standing ovation. The billionaire bride had not just gotten her revenge, she had reclaimed her throne.